part of our 15-minute neighborhoods campaign that we are collaborating on with our friends at Walkable Ottawa. So Carolyn will give a bit of an introduction about Walkable Ottawa and how we've both been working on this campaign together.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so my name is Carolyn McKenzie. I'm with Walkable Ottawa, volunteer with Walkable Ottawa, as we are all volunteers. And I want to welcome everyone tonight, and thanks for taking the time and making the time to be engaged in things to do with the city. Walkable Ottawa is, I'm sure a number of you are familiar, but we're focused on trying to transition neighborhoods in Ottawa to greater livability and walkability. That's a primary focus, and we try to do it by collaboration and working towards practical solutions with any and all stakeholders who are willing to work with us and the public at large. So thanks for coming this evening.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. And we will be recording this session. Of course, we'll be going into breakout rooms later in the session. We won't record those, but the content portion we'll be recording, so you should hear that start momentarily. But yeah, let's dive right in. So yeah, today we're going to be discussing how to do a public delegation at City Hall, and what makes a good one. So just by a show of hands, who has done a delegation at City Hall, a committee already? Who's at least somewhat familiar with this process? Okay, I'm not seeing a lot of hands, which is great. You're in the right place. So that's great. So the insights today, this will be applicable to any delegation that you give at most committees, but we're going to be framing ours around training around advocacy for the zoning bylaw, which is one of the biggest items that's coming up to council in the coming months. Great. And so I'll talk a bit about the zoning bylaw so far. So zoning determines what can and can't be built and where in the city. And those rules for Ottawa are changing. So the city's current bylaw was originally brought in 2008. And so we are due for a new one. And the City of Ottawa's new zoning bylaw has been in development for the better part of 2 years. The first draft was released in May 2024, the second draft in June 2025, and the third and final draft just was released last month. So each draft so far, or each of the first two drafts went to committee for approval. It was actually a joint session of the Planning and Housing Committee and the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, where it was debated and voted on before being sent to City Council. So the final version is going to this joint committee in December, which means we're all entering the final weeks where the public has any influence at all over the outcome of a document that we're going to be stuck with for the next 20 years. And there's a lot to like in the draft zoning bylaw. It puts an end to most parking minimums. It increases gentle intensification in neighborhoods, and there will be more amenities allowed along main corridors. But the document could be a lot better. There's provisions in it that retain very high maximum allowances for commercial parking lots, and there are some carve-outs for minimum parking rates in rural areas that ultimately undermine the full benefit of what we could have from this document. So, of course, City Council has the final say, but it's only at a committee that you can speak as a public delegate. So this is your chance to make your voice heard. So what you may be thinking is, doesn't City Hall just kind of do what they want to do? How on earth is one of us, or even everyone in this room, giving our opinion at City Hall going to make a difference? What's the actual value of giving a public delegation? So in my experience, it comes down to three things. One is that you're able to raise your concern in a public forum. And that's very different than having an email chain with your counselor or a phone call, because that's that's not for the public to see. That's kind of more or less off the record. And when you delegate in a public forum, the media can also report on it, and often they will reach out to delegates to do an interview, and so that allows you to discuss the issues that you were raising even further, and to influence the public debate around it. The second is that councillors will often have motions on the table that are designed to alter the legislation before them in various ways. So if a councillor has a motion on the table to improve something, to make it better than the existing text, they're going to want to marshal support for that. And every public delegation that's speaking in favor of it allows them to kind of build consensus and say, hey, people actually want to see what I'm putting forward. And then finally, it just helps shift the narrative ahead of the final council vote. You can't speak at the council meetings, and so this is your chance to try and influence the ideas and the nature of the debate that is going on. So, with that said, we're going to talk a bit about how you register to speak at a committee. So, finding things on the City of Ottawa website is not easy. So when you register to delegate at a committee, the best thing you want to do is simply Google City of Ottawa eScribe. And then the first result that comes up is going to be a calendar. And that's the calendar you're going to want to access.
Quick interruption here, Nick. I think the slides aren't advancing. Yeah, perfect. Okay. I think we're one down the road from this.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just want to go. Yeah, we'll want to go to this slide, and then we'll go ahead and show you the calendar right here. That's perfect. Yeah. So as I mentioned, the committee vote for the zoning bylaw is happening in December, so that's not ready yet. And so what we're going to do, we're just going to go ahead and click on one of tomorrow's. Let's go Planning Advisory Committee. And we'll go with that one. And then, so you're going to click on the agenda cover page, which is one of the links there at the top. And then once that is open, you will see the contact for the committee coordinator. In this case, that's Eric. And what you're going to want to do is copy their email, and you're going to want to send that coordinator an email basically saying, I would like to register to speak at this committee on this date. If the agenda is fully ready, you can say, I want to speak to item 4. If the agenda is not ready yet, just express what you would like to speak to, what issue that you would like to speak to, and they'll be able to organize you into the right item. And so, yeah, that's the best way to register. And if you are speaking on behalf of an organization, include that in the email. So if I'm delegating on behalf of Ecology Ottawa, I would tell that to Eric. And then when they introduce me at the committee, they'll make it clear that I'm speaking on behalf of that organization. If you have slides, if you have a presentation you want to show, make sure to send that at least 24 hours in advance. But you're certainly under no obligation to have a full presentation ready. So yeah, so that is, yeah.
Nick, there was one, sorry to interrupt. There was one question.
Great.
When or how do you find out about any motions that have been or will be tabled? Going to that end, I guess that can be a little bit tricky because often those motions are being worked on almost up to the last minute before committee meets. So often you'll show up and you're not actually aware of the motions until they're actually tabled at committee itself, and then they will typically have whatever the item is, they'll have a staff presentation, let's say, to present whatever's being recommended or what have you. And then they'll say, okay, well, let's have the motions presented so that the delegations to come can be at least aware of those motions. Now, obviously, you don't have a lot of time that is a challenge because you don't have a lot of time to digest that and maybe to adapt what you're going to be what you're going to be speaking to. But unfortunately, that seems to be the way things work.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's sometimes motions are very last minute. Sometimes advocacy groups might be aware of them, and they'll try and mobilize support. And so, check websites of various advocacy groups that are relevant to the issue. They might be aware of them. They might have written something about it. William, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know if sorry, I don't know who it is behind Wood Park, Ottawa. But I don't know if your question is about motions in particular or like issues in general, say like a development or a strategic plan or something like that. But there's a lot of issues um, for which the city will send updates when they're available. And there's a whole kind of newsletter subscription list that you can sign up for. And that's another really good way to find out, to get word whenever something is posted. So, for example, the climate resiliency strategy, Climate Ready Ottawa, just went live, I think last week. And those of us on that list got an email from it. So that's another good way, that the city has set up for folks to stay apprised of issues.
I think I'm on that list. Thanks for that. When I did go to committee, like they were tabling motions during the session, so it would be hard to kind of comment and in your prepared text or whatever you're going to say because you weren't aware about it, so you didn't have a chance to look at it or anything like that. So I just didn't know if there was some kind of deadline of which all motions had to be posted beforehand or anything like that. And it sounds like it's a bit of a free for all.
It unfortunately is. In fact, they can have walk-on motions, and so other councillors around the table have no advance warning of them either. You will find them in the minutes post after the meeting, so it is possible to at least confirm what the motion was. It doesn't exactly help you at the time of, so you can either sort of ignore it and just say, okay, I'm going to stay on my script, or try and adapt at the last minute. But it's a challenge for sure.
Definitely. Thanks. Yeah, that was a good question and good answers. And yeah, if anyone has questions, please throw them in the chat. I'll try and notice them, but if I don't notice them, please, Carolyn or William, feel free.
Yeah, I've got the chat open, so I'll
flag them.
Yeah,
that's great. Okay, and yeah, the last thing I'll say in preparation when you register, you do have the option to register, or sorry, you have the option to just submit your comments in writing to the coordinator. The limitation of that is that it will be sent to the committee members, but it won't be presented publicly. And so you do miss out on that public aspect. It'll be part of the public record, but it's not as impactful as speaking to the committee. So we do recommend you register to delegate, to actually to speak, whether it's virtual or in person. So yeah, we'll go over to the next slide, which is about preparing your delegation. So it's kind of a daunting task, right? It's an exercise in trying to say something that's punchy, concise, personal, and persuasive in the span of 5 minutes or less. And this takes practice, but it is doable. And we're going to work through some of the ways to do that tonight. So I would recommend, 5 minutes. It sounds like a short amount of time, but I would actually recommend don't try and pack in too much information. Try and focus on making it impactful rather than taking up the full allotted time. Because, a 2-minute delegation in theory can be a lot more impactful and memorable than one that sort of takes the full 5 minutes. And keep your audience in mind. Councillors absolutely should be listening to every single person that shows up, but at the end of the day, they are human beings. They get tired, and we get tired too if we're waiting there to delegate. And so, do try and make it stand out. Try and make clear connections to existing city priorities, in this case, the zoning bylaw or motions that are on the table, so that it's very clear to them, like, why they need to pay attention to this. Speak from your personal perspective, where it's relevant, and try to anticipate and respond to potential objections to your remarks in the event that you don't have time to do that later. And so, fair warning, it can take a while to get to your item in the agenda. I know sometimes I've delegated at the transit committee, and it'll be like 5 or 6 hours before the item actually comes up. It's unfortunate. Ecology Ottawa has called for reforms in the form of putting items that have delegates up earlier in the meeting, for exactly this reason, to make it more accessible. But in the meantime, there's a few ways to get around this. So the coordinator should provide you with a speakers list in advance of your time to delegate. If they don't, you can ask them for one, and that will tell you where within the item you're speaking. So it'll say like you're number 5 on the list to speak to item 5 on the agenda. But what they won't really want to tell you, because they don't always know, is how long it will take to get to your item. And so if you've got a busy day and you don't have 5 or 6 hours to sit at City Hall or sit on Zoom, you can follow along on the City of Ottawa's YouTube live stream, and you can check in and see, okay, we're only on item 2. Great, I have a bit of time. And you can kind of keep up with the debate as it's progressing. Horizon Ottawa also has a live tweeting, really a service that they provide. It's very useful. They will live tweet or perhaps live blue sky the committee as it's going. And that way you can follow, okay, here's what's being said. Here's the sort of nature of the debate so far. This is what item they're on. And this is how long it's going to take to get to my item. So I find that a very useful way to keep apprised of what's happening without necessarily having my eyes glued to the call the whole time. So were there any, before we move on, were there any questions about the registration or kind of the logistics of the
Nick, maybe I'll just pick up on a question and an answer, Williams, in the chat. So the question was, basically someone was saying that they wanted to speak to an item, but they didn't see it on the agenda for the next committee meeting. Is it still possible to delegate on the topic that they wanted to speak to? And the short answer, the default answer is no. If it's not on the agenda, you can't just show up at committee and talk about whatever it is you want to speak to. It has to be relevant to an agenda item. That being said, if you can, I would say you don't want to annoy the committee chair and committee members by really pushing your luck. But if you can find, if there's a reasonable link to whatever it is you want to talk about and an agenda item, then it is possible. But just be prepared for the committee chair to say, I don't believe that this is relevant to the agenda item. So, and we're speaking to these issues today and these agenda items. And so be prepared to get the hook, and or have a explanation as to how what you want to talk about relates to the agenda item that they are discussing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll just maybe add to that that's all completely right. One opportunity to speak to basically whatever you want is the budget. Since the budget is so all-encompassing, and actually, as it happens, the budget is coming up in November. I think November 12th or something like that, it gets tabled. And then thereafter, there are committee meetings for each portion of the budget. So that's the best opportunity, annual opportunity anyway, to speak to whatever you want there. But even then, a committee chair would be completely within the rights to expect you to be calling for budgetary decisions to be made for whatever you're talking about, right? So you really do have to stay on task, at least according to the rules.
Yeah, great. That's a good point.
Yeah, good question. And yeah, thank you both. Okay, great. So yeah, we'll move on to examples. So it's time, you get a bit of a break from me talking for a little bit, and we're going to watch some successful delegations. The first clip is going to be from Carolyn from Walkable Ottawa. And this clip is of her speaking to draft 2 of the zoning bylaw when it came out this spring. And she's advocating what's called interim transitional parking. And so we're going to take a look at an excerpt from her delegation and look at what made it a good delegation, what she did very well. So we'll just go ahead and play that.
Okay, I'll just start off by thanking staff for all your work on this huge effort. We know that lack of housing, particularly affordable housing, has real-life consequences for residents. The new zoning bylaw is obviously a crucial tool in addressing this issue. However, there remain several barriers to getting more housing built, one of which is parking, and Councillor Johnson's motion is a reflection of that, I think. Now, you might wonder why someone interested in promoting more walkable, livable neighborhoods would advocate for more parking options for cars in neighborhoods. The answer lies in our need to increase the supply and diversity of housing types, particularly missing middle or low-rise multi-unit apartment buildings. While zoning may permit such developments, they're unlikely to be built without frequent, reliable, and well-connected transit, something that clearly remains a challenge for much of Ottawa. Continued reliance on cars means that people will still need somewhere to park. And the reality is that there isn't sufficient demand for homes in transit-deficient neighborhoods unless they come with parking for most, if not all, units. As a result, developers are reluctant to build small apartment buildings if they can't provide parking. At the same time, the city struggles to provide that frequent, reliable, and connected transit without the density and tax revenues that come with increased intensification, thus creating a classic catch-22 dilemma. To address this, we propose allowing neighborhood parking lots within residential zones, certainly to consider them as a practical solution to overcome on-site parking limitations. If a developer or builder who owns multiple lots in a neighborhood could designate a single lot for limited parking, this could enable the construction of higher density housing, such as fourplexes or small apartment buildings on the other lots. This approach would support Ottawa's intensification goals while acknowledging the continued reliance on cars in areas with inadequate transit options.
Great. So I know I personally don't like watching myself on video, so apologies, Carolyn, if that's the case for you too. But I did think this is a really good illustration. What I liked about it is, so Carolyn highlights not only the benefits of her proposal, but she connects it directly to the city's own priorities and a motion that's currently on the table. So she didn't just show up to talk about something that was important. It's relevant to the committee members. And she also gets out in front of a potential objection in a way that helps her clarify her central point. Which is a very good use of the limited time you have there. And so, so and she was speaking to something that's it's a very technical proposal, and managed to do all of that while doing it. So, Carolyn, I wanted to ask, what are some ways that you've improved your delegation game over the years, and what led you to make those improvements as you went? Because I think you've been delegating for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always learning, and that's there's no perfect, and people come at it from different in different ways. But I think that the main elements that you've talked about, Nick, but certainly practicing. I can't stress that enough. You've got 5 minutes, and then you will get the hook. You will. So when you're speaking, when you prepare, and I always prepare notes, and I practice. I time myself, and I slow down my speech, and because a lot of I've seen lots of delegations, people they write too much, and they might time themselves maybe once, and they're speaking much more quickly than they would normally, and then they get into it. And the city actually, one of the squares that you'll see on the Zoom will be the actual time, and you can see people will get 4 minutes into their speaking notes and realize they're only halfway through, and then all of a sudden they start to speed up. And then they've come with 20 slides, and they're only 3 slides in, and they're like, okay, just they'll ask the person to advance the slides quickly, and it's easy to get into a panic. So what I would say is, if you're going to do slides, and that's always a good thing. I didn't have any slides here, but always it is a good thing to do. My suggestion: no more than 5 slides, 1 slide per minute. Time yourself, retime yourself, slow your speech down. put yourself in the shoes of the counselors who are hearing you for the first time. Maybe they haven't even thought, they've never given any thought to whatever issue that you're going to come and speak to. Assume they know nothing of what you're going to say, and just slow it right down. Imagine how much information they are bombarded with on all sorts of issues across the city every day. So help them out. Simplify your message, I would say, as well. Don't try to get too technical. So speak slowly, practice, time yourself. Try to weave a bit of a story, and even in the telling, even when you're speaking, I would say, and I'm still trying to do this myself, obviously, but try to weave together a bit of a story. And when you're speaking, I hear some people very monotone for 5 minutes, and you can noticeably see counselors just kind of like looking away because they're that it's just harder to follow. Try to think like almost like a broadcaster would, and punctuate your speech. Now those are kind of more speaking tips. And then just to remind, I guess, what Nick had talked about, say what you're going to say up front, make sure that it's clear, relate it back to the city's priorities, why this benefits the city, why it's important. And then at the end, I would say a call to action and sort of marketing speak. What is it that you're asking? Be really clear about that, because oftentimes people will come and they'll talk for 5 minutes. It's all kind of interesting, and they don't necessarily get questions because counselors are like, well, what do you want to do with this? What do you want us to do with this exactly? Be really specific at the very end. Just have a very clear ask of what you'd like counselors to do. With whether it's a change to a proposal, modification, introducing something new, whatever it is, just be very clear about what it is, really, to answer the question of like, okay, so what? So you've spoken for 5 minutes. So what, what's your point? And one thing I do as well, and it oftentimes in advance, because you only have 5 minutes, and sometimes it's very difficult to say everything you want to say in 5 minutes in a simple manner. And there are details. I will actually email either my counselor or a counselor that I've been perhaps dealing with, or a friendly counselor, I'll send them my speaking notes. And I'll say, if you might consider asking me this question after my delegation, so that I have a bit, then I might have a bit more time to speak as well. So that's also a way to perhaps get a bit more time on the agenda. I think those are sort of my top sort of things. And I guess depending on the issue, like sometimes you might feel very, very strongly and passionate about things. Some people come in and they're quite angry at times. Other people, I find that if you come in and you're accusing people of things, you're accusing the city of things, or accusing staff of things through your comments, that can get people's backs up, obviously. So coming in and certainly starting off like thanking staff at the front end for the work that they've done, just trying to be approachable as well, to invite people to ask you questions. I think that's helpful. You're more likely to get questions if you're showing make your point, but show an openness as well, so that counselors feel more likely to actually continue the conversation with you, I guess. I don't know. I think those are my top my top tips. Still learning. It's a learning process. Yeah, always room for improvement.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. That's super useful. And yeah, just to echo something, like, do the people showing up as delegates have a right to be heard by counselors? Yes, absolutely. Are there a lot of things we want to bring to counselors' attention? Absolutely. But is this necessarily the time that they're going to have the attention span or the bandwidth to hear all of it? No. And so yeah, you want to make it simple, and you want to make it clear. And there might be especially for the budget, as William mentioned, you have a bit of a more bandwidth for the budget. You may want to bring up a lot of issues, but you can bring up 5 or 10 issues haphazardly, or 1 or 2 and really hit it home. And so I think that's sort of the value there. So the next clip we've got is from William, and so it's not focused specifically on the zoning bylaw, but it's something that we've been advocating for in our zoning advocacy as well, which is trees. And so this clip is of William delegating to the Environment Committee about the latest data that we have on tree cover in the city. And so let's give that one a watch.
We are pleased, of course, to receive new information connected with this tree strategy, the strategy's latest installment, the canopy mapping, and the tree equity analysis. There are several items that we're pleased to see in particular. First, we applaud taking account of equity in upcoming planting. The numerous benefits of trees, including for human health, are well known, as is the correlation between, for example, low incomes in neighborhoods and low tree cover. We're also pleased to see Milwaukee forests in the new strategy. This forestry approach has huge potential to accelerate forest growth, including in urban areas. Finally, we're pleased to see mention of, quoting, an upcoming assessment of ecosystem services, including carbon sequestration, in conjunction with a forest resource inventory project, as mentioned in the GHG inventory elsewhere on this agenda. This will help us account for trees' value in our city. The City of Toronto, for example, calculated that its urban forest contributes over $55 million annually in ecosystem services. We do have several concerns with the strategy and the associated memos, however. To begin with, we seem to be missing a lot of data. I'll begin with inventory issues. The report observes that, quote, on average, Forestry Services plants 88,000 trees each year through a variety of planting programs. The report only accounts for about 2,000 of these. So where are the other 86,000 trees going, and via what programs? And how has this number varied over the years? We know that planting was delayed for several months after the derecho in 2022. So how many trees fewer were planted then, for example? The inventory also describes overall canopy decline in the urban area, but we're missing some basic information here too. So for planting 88,000 trees per year, how many are we losing? What are the causes of this loss? The canopy memo also promises that, quote, members of council will also receive ward-specific information sheets summarizing tree canopy data. Will this information also be released to the public? If not, why not? These are all basic issues, we think, surrounding the tree canopy, and can't really think of any reason why to withhold.
I cut you off mid-sentence, but nonetheless, yeah. So what I like about that delegation, and I think Williams' delegations in general, is that it's really it's using one of the main functions of delegations in a public setting, which is holding council accountable. And so it's saying that, okay, you've made these claims and these pledges, and here's what your own data says. And I think obviously we are an advocacy group. We have the capacity to dig into reports and data that unfortunately that is not easy to do for most people who wish to delegate. But nonetheless, it's good. It's good to use the space to basically hold the committee members accountable and highlight maybe discrepancies between what they've pledged to do and what the actions and the progress is saying. And so, William, I'll pose to you the same question that I did for Carolyn, which is basically what are some ways that you've improved how you do delegations over time, and sort of what has made you learn those lessons?
Sure, yeah. I was happy to hear that so many of Carolyn's items were on my list as well. Someone who's as pro as Carolyn is at this, so I'll try not to repeat those. First thing I would mention is just to tailor everything, whether according to the audience or the issue or even the political atmosphere at the time. I think you can go back to committees with the same hopes and asks and stuff like that, but you'll only get success by really having something that suits the moment. One respect in which that's true is, I think, asking for very specific things, and you want things that really pertain to, again, that moment in the legislative trajectory, and something that is also politically feasible. Can something, be passed by the folks around the table, and will it advance what you're asking for? Um, you could also ask for questions to be asked, as I was doing in this delegation. That, I was trying to feed counselors questions that I thought they should ask of staff because the reports didn't weren't up to snuff. Um, as Carolyn mentioned, sharing your script with counselors in advance, developing relationships also with counselors, I think. Practice, as she mentioned, very important. I also add italics to my script so I know which words I need to emphasize, because it's easy to get lost in your own script. And I do write out a script. I don't recall if you mentioned this, Carolyn, whether you do outline form or just practice and practice until you got it right. But I find a script useful, even though it can be a little bit wooden at times. I have a cheat sheet of the city's commitments that I can draw on and use to kind of whack them over the head with in these not that it always works, but I think it's just saves you time in the prep. I should say too, reading the reports on a given issue, look, they're a little bit dry at times, but there is so much that's valuable for a delegation in these reports. And they're usually not as long as they look, because they're bilingual to a large extent. So yeah, a lot of your work will be done in the report, and you just need to surface some items that are mentioned in the report, in your delegation. Consider visuals. A picture can be worth 1,000 words, and it can even be a quote. You can have a quote there that is particularly effective. Um, and then I think kind of like the afterlife of a delegation might be worth considering. For example, putting lines in your delegation that the media can lift out and share in media stories. Then you get kind of more kilometerage out of your delegation. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
Great, thanks, William. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, and I'll add to the prep portion that it's most important to just know yourself and know what works for you. Because, for example, if I'm really pressed for time, I'm giving a delegation tomorrow. I'll write a script and I'll read from it just so I know that I'm not forgetting anything. But I know myself, and personally, if I'm reading a script versus reading, out of my head, it's not going to quite be as impactful. And so I do try and have like the key points written down, and then I speak to each of them as if it's conversational. And that's what I aim to do. But just know your process, know what works for you. If you can write a script and that's exactly what you're going to say and you're going to read it really effectively, great, do that. It's certainly a lot easier than trying to memorize it. But do what's going to best bring it home. So the next thing we're going to talk about is questions. So Carolyn and William both kind of alluded to this already, that there is opportunity to speak more than just the allotted 5 minutes if you get a question from a committee member. In my experience, most of the time they will not ask you a question, so which can it can be a little deflating. You've done all this prep work and you've waited at the committee for several hours only to say your piece, and then you're not really sure if anyone listened. But there are ways to try and induce questions, which Carolyn and William both spoke about. And I would say there's 3 types of questions when you do get them, because it's good, even if there's a low chance of getting a question, you want to be ready. Probably the one I'm most familiar with is a lob. So you've been speaking to something. Let's say you've been talking about the benefits of better bus service, and a counselor has a motion on the table to improve bus service. They're gonna want to ask you a question and be like, Nick, why do you think better bus service is really important? Because they want you to speak to why their motion is a good thing, and you'll happily do it because you want that to advance. Um, a little rare is like a gotcha type question. I think these are probably reserved more for advocates, which are maybe perceived as like professional activists, which we aren't. We are people who care. But sometimes the question will be framed a little like trying to poke a hole in someone's delegation. Um, and so you want to be ready for that. But if you're speaking as a concerned citizen, it's not very likely you'll get that. I wouldn't say that committee members are like routinely mean or hostile or anything like that. It's rare, probably reserved for the likes of me and William and Carolyn. Not that we've had a ton of experience with that either. And the third is, I would say it's a chance to say more. It's kind of an open-ended question, like, hey, can you expand on that thing you said? And you'll be like, yeah, of course I will. I'll take an extra minute or two to talk about this issue that I really care about. And so, yeah, I'd say those are the main types of questions to kind of be ready for. As I said earlier, in the event you don't get a question, you want to try and do what Carolyn did, which is kind of preempt possible objections in your delegation. Because if a committee member thinks that, wow, nothing they said was very good and it's just full of holes, they probably just won't follow up. They'll probably just dismiss it. So it's good to preempt those and say, you may think I'm saying this, but I'm actually saying this, and really clarify what you're getting at. And so, yeah, we're going to go back to Carolyn now. This is a question she received on the delegation we watched previously. The counselor who asked it is usually quite a very nice counselor, so I don't think this is like a mean-spirited gotcha, but I would say that it's that type of question. And so let's see how Carolyn dealt with it.
Yeah, so I'm used to seeing you here with your other hat with the Glebe Community Association. So my question is, in terms of this communal parking idea, is this something you would advocate in the inner urban core as well as in other neighborhoods? So in your own neighborhood, is this something you would want to see in the Glebe?
I think it's something that needs to be considered throughout the city. We've actually, now I focused, strictly speaking, on communal neighborhoods. We wrote to the city collectively saying, please consider this. Please also look much more closely at expanding on-street parking permit system. We need to, the main message was that this is an issue. Parking is an issue. Developers, and I sound like I'm a lobby for the development industry now, perhaps, but we're not likely to see, or we'll get very limited builds of missing middle if we can't solve the parking problem in the short term. Certainly until we get transit. So what we're saying is that we need to tackle this head on. We can't sort of be head in the sand on this issue, and I think we should be looking at a suite of options for addressing that. But communal parking lots, I believe, should be on the table, and I've talked about using a context-sensitive approach and putting in guardrails so that not everyone will be a fan of the idea of introducing more parking. There's no question, but we see it also as a transitional move to providing parking until such time as transit catches up.
Okay, but do you see this working in a place like the Glebe, where Bank Street has too many cars?
Yeah, I do. Again, I'm not going to. These comments are not limited to particular areas.
Yeah, so I think that was a great way of projecting confidence and standing your ground and saying, yeah, actually, I believe in the thing I'm delegating for. The fact that it's in my neighborhood or somewhere else doesn't change that. And so I think that was a good way to respond. Because I think the gotcha type of question is sometimes intended to imply that, well, you don't really believe this, or you wouldn't want to live with it, so why should other people? And so it's a good way to sort of Yeah, stand up for what it is you're saying. And the next example we have here on the next slide is William. This is a different committee meeting. William was he was speaking to a report that discussed the ways that the city has reduced emissions, and one of the points he was making was that it doesn't take account of the ways the city is increasing emissions. And so one counselor gave him the chance to say more, and he used the opportunity very effectively. So we'll go ahead and watch that now.
Well, I noted many things that you'd mentioned, but the comment about the budget talking about which initiatives reduce emissions, but is silent on those that increase. Has Ecology Ottawa had time to do any analysis to identify initiatives where there'll be a net increase in emissions?
Yeah, the big one I think is the road widenings that we see. We know from the phenomenon of induced demand that will simply bring more cars on the road, and more emissions from that. I think we could probably talk about the procurement for concrete and all the embedded emissions in there. I think probably across the board on capital expenditures, that analysis should be done. Yeah, I'd love to follow up with a few other possible areas on that.
Yeah, so I really liked, so maybe this was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but there's this sort of pause before you answer, and you think, oh no, he doesn't have an answer for this, and then you hit it home with this great answer, and I think that's a really effective speaking tactic. So yeah, that was great. So highlighting the emissions increase of widening roads is not something that William probably could have spoken to in his delegation, because it wouldn't have maybe been considered relevant to the topic at hand. But by being given this opportunity to answer a question that was directly posed, he used it very well. He used it to talk about that additional and very relevant issue. So that was a good, that was a good use of that answer. So Carolyn and William, sorry, Carolyn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer up just a couple quick ones that you just alluded to it. If you get asked a kind of a gotcha type question, and those are the hardest ones, because by definition, a gotcha type question is one you're also probably not anticipating getting. And I wasn't anticipating getting that one. And I think Councillor Troster was clearly trying to get me to say, well, no, not in my neighborhood. Good for everybody else across the city, but not in my neighborhood. But I think as a general thing, don't rush into an answer. I mean, as you just highlighted with William, don't rush into an answer. Take a moment, take a breath before getting into it. When I cringe a little bit when I watch myself and hear my answer. I was certainly sort of, I'll say, noodling around and using it as an opportunity to bring in some other parts that I wasn't able to get to in my 5 minutes in my answer, while I was thinking, okay, where's she going to go with this? Knowing, sort of anticipating that she probably would circle back, which she did. But I don't think, trying not to get on the defense by taking some time to think through. And if you do find yourself in a situation where you've been asked a question and you really don't have an answer, it's something you've not thought about, don't necessarily feel compelled to provide an answer, I guess would be the other thing. I'd say, just say, well, I'm not sure that's an you could simply respond by saying, that's a very interesting question. It's something that I would be interested in replying to, but I need a bit more time to think through the full implications. Like, come across as someone who's considerate rather than reactionary to questions, rather than leaving a poor impression by answering something and where it's quite clear you have no clue what you've. So don't feel compelled or pushed into an answer that you really don't want to leave on the public record, I guess is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice. Since we're quickly hurdling towards 7:30, I have one question for Carolyn and William, and then we'll go into our breakout groups. I just wanted you both to speak to. So in these examples, you answered the question very well. Is there a time where you had a really tough question that maybe you didn't have a great answer for, and kind of how you recovered from it, or what you would do differently, next time?
I'm sure the answer is yes. And I guess I would go back to perhaps the repeating what I just said in effect, which was that sometimes you get, and I've been asked questions from counselors, sometimes my own counselor, and I didn't realize that question was going to be asked, and I wasn't even too sure what the question was, but it was a very long question, and I probably should have just responded in the way I suggested, which was to say, well, that's a really interesting question, but I'm not sure that I've given enough thought or really looked at that closely enough to provide you with an adequate answer today. So that's I think that's more the situation. Sometimes you feel compelled to answer the question because you've got a platform, so you feel compelled to kind of fill the space. But there are dangers to that as well. So if you think that there's more danger, then just put a period in it, say something to respond in that way, and kind of move on.
That's great. William, any thoughts?
Yeah, actually, that particular one, I'd forgotten about that. That one, I found that one really tough, and my answer unsatisfactory. I also don't know what I would add to it off the top of my head. But I will point out that questions are an opportunity, right? As I think
Yeah.
Carolyn has alluded to a number of times, like to add stuff that you know, wished that you included and didn't, or just to clarify. Sometimes I'll refer back to my delegation to say, hey, look, as I said in my delegation, and on and on and on. I find preparing an FAQ, a set of FAQs is really important, not only for the content that you dig up for that, so you're ready, with a particular question, you've got the answer, but also the rehearsal that entails, right? Like, what sort of questions am I likely to get? And even if the question you get isn't on that list, simply the exercise is helpful in itself. I would strongly recommend taking pen and paper to the delegation so that as a person is asking the question, especially if it's a long-winded one, like Carolyn was saying, you can start taking a few notes for yourself. And then developing relationships with counselors is not the worst thing either, so that they are less likely to go after you with their questions.
Great.
Janet has a question, I think.
Yeah, Janet, I see you have your hands up. Before we head into breakout rooms, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. That was actually really good. I thought those examples were really good. And I just like the fact that you guys talked about coming across as like kind of cooperative and collegial rather than just like angry. Because I think to the extent that it's picked up by the media and stuff like that, it's better to look like you're kind of part of the team and you've done your homework. So I was really good. So I just had two questions. One of them is like, I'm looking at the calendar for November. Like, what are we looking for here in terms of opportunities to talk about the zoning bylaw? I don't see anything on that eScribe calendar.
No, it's coming up in December, and so I don't think it's there yet.
Okay.
But it will be, and we'll promote and probably publish some materials about it, and we'll certainly email this group to let them know when it's coming up. That'll be our follow-up for sure.
Okay. Because that was my other question is there going to be kind of a Coles Notes of the new zoning bylaw? Because I when it first came out, like everybody was saying it was super long and super detailed and not kind of for the layperson. So I don't know what we're looking at, but like I'd read 10 or 20 or 30 pages, but I don't know I have no idea what we're talking about here in terms of the reading commitment.
No, fair enough. No obligation to read the full zoning bylaw. We have primers on our website. I sent one of them around yesterday, but we have a bunch on our website. we'll throw that link in the chat to our main campaign page. And when I email people when the committee date is set, I'll be sure to include those resources because, yeah, it's true. It's not made terribly accessible to someone who isn't a city planner. So, we want to try and make it as accessible to not only attend delegations, but to speak to them with some confidence about the subject matter. So, yeah, that's why we write those primers and those blog posts.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, you guys usually do a pretty good job of making the homework like accessible to regular people. So yes, thank you for doing that.
That's good to know. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start our breakout rooms. Just if we can go to the next slide, I'll explain. So we're going to do 3 rounds of breakout rooms. So we've been talking about delegations in general. So I'm not expecting you to write and rehearse and fine-tune a full delegation. But what we're going to do in these breakout rooms is we're going to practice an element that's important to a delegation. And you're going to workshop these. So in yesterday's email, I asked that everybody identify, an issue or a theme that you'd like to speak to. And what we're going to do in this first breakout group, which will have 3 or 4 people, each person's going to workshop and discuss how to make their issue, how to convey that their issue matters, that this is important that the city does this. Because of course, the things that matter to us a great deal, but we have to convey in a delegation this matters to city council, this matters to the city. And so we're going to practice doing that. I'll be hopping between the rooms, and you should have at least one representative of our groups there if you want some advice or need some questions. But we're going to spend about 10 minutes on this question of how to convey and present that your issue is worth caring about, whether it's for the media, for councillors, or for the public. And so